advice do you give them that are willing to take this centered approach and join this journey to centeredness, knowing that they could full well really isolate and infuriate or frustrate the people that they are in leadership with?
I want to, and this is more a comment to them, not advice, but an important observation. So in the book, I'm seeking to, and in our conversation today, I'm seeking to make these categories very clear, bounded, fuzzy, centered, and make them distinct from each other and different. In real life, it's again messier, and so and I guess this ends up being advice. So a piece of advice is don't look at and say, oh, we're centered. Like, yeah, Mark, we're with you. Great. Or to say, oh, we're bounded and what a lousy thing we've got. I think most churches are either a mix of, bounded and centered, or fuzzy and centered, or even within a church, you might have, people that are fuzzy and some that are bounded. And so the question is not just, oh, are we bounded or are we centered? But I think the question is, how can we become more centered? So my one piece of advice is don't start by we're this or that in a binary kind of way and think, okay, now we've arrived. So one is to constantly be asking, how can we become more centered? Second thing of advice, and I'd already said this, so I'll just repeat it quickly, is I think it's extremely important to share the concepts with the congregation or with the group you're ministering to, so that there's a common sense of understanding this is what we're trying to do. And I think that becomes helpful, not just in bringing people on board with you, but it helps in communication. So then you're in a meeting, and there's examples of this in the book, but you're in a meeting and the leader can say, okay, now remember, we're trying to be centered. Or a situation comes up and you can ask, boy, I don't know, how can we do this in a centered way? And so it becomes helpful language in helping you become centered. So one is to ask the question, to be constantly asking the question, how can we become more centered? The second is to introduce people to the categories, and that can become common language. And then I think a very crucial thing is, obviously, I think these categories, these concepts are important, valuable tools. But of fundamental importance is, who is the God of the center? And so I have a chapter on that in the book, because, and you think of it this way, if you are thinking, okay, we're going to become centered, but if most of the people in your group, in your congregation, are living a God of conditional love, if their view of God is a sort of finger-pointing, judgmental God, then the church is going to be bounded, because their experience, that concept of God will trump anything you do to try and be centered. So that's why I think it's of extreme importance to make very clear, to work at God being the God that's revealed to us by Jesus. So I work with Jesus a lot in the book, both as an example of let's learn from Jesus how to be centered, but also learn from Jesus then who is God. So that would be another piece of advice I would give. And then I guess lastly, and I referred to this before, but to not be thinking of learning, these 6 or 7 different, this is the centered way to do this, the centered way to do this, but to be working at qualities that enable your group, your ministry to be centered. So, and I have a chapter in the book on that as well, but, compassion, curiosity, creativity, safety, where people can be vulnerable, trust, and that's both as a leader, my trust that God is the one that's going to make this happen, and trust between people, and then humility, humility with others that we're a work in process. So developing those qualities, and that will facilitate the living out of a centered approach.